future of healthcare has arrived. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are transforming the practice of medicine and improving patient outcomes. This is Smarter Healthcare with AI. Conversations with Dr. Hassan Tetteh as he shares insights into the healthcare of tomorrow and how we can help create it today.
My guest today is Dr. Robert Pearl, a leading voice in healthcare reform, former CEO of the Permanente Medical Group, and a best-selling author. His book is currently #1. His latest work, ChatGPT MD, reflects his commitment to improving healthcare through AI, with all profits supporting Doctors Without Borders, I might add. As a Stanford University professor and a Forbes contributor, Dr. Pearl educates on the intersection of medicine and technology, drawing from his extensive leadership experience. Recognized by modern healthcare as one of the most influential physician leaders, he continues to shape the future of healthcare delivery and policy. Dr. Pearl, it is a true honor and welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure being here this morning.
I do have to give some context, a little pretext for the audience. I think they'll appreciate this. I came across your article that you wrote for Forbes, where you referenced your book, and I made a posting on my LinkedIn profile, and it generated quite a stir. And it was just comment after comment. It really just, I think, is an indicator of how important and how interesting this topic is of AI and healthcare, but in particular, the highlight that you had of whether or not AI should be responsible if there is liability or a bad outcome with the prediction or decision that was made. And so it caused quite the stir. So I won't bring that up right now, but we'll certainly get into it. I do want to start in this way, though. I had the pleasure of reading your book and appreciating something that you started out with, which it really touched me, literally touched my heart. You talked about the modern miracle of heart transplantation, and you took us back to Cape Town and what happened there. And it was not lost on me immediately how special of a time that was, because it represented a true inflection point for modern cardiac surgery. I trained at the University of Minnesota, and it has a steep history in making much of what is modern cardiac surgery today, and the many giants that left that institution, like Dr. Lilly High and so forth. In fact, Dr. Christian Bernard came to study at University of Minnesota and performed some of the lab experiments before he went there, just to refine his technique before going to South Africa. You talked about it being a modern miracle at that time, and you liken ChatGPT and AI, large language models, basically where we are right now in that same guise as a modern miracle. Explain that to the audience. Let's start there.
ChatGPT, and I use that only because it flows nicely into the book title, ChatGPT MD. It's really all the generative AI applications. It includes Gemini from Google, and it includes Claude from Anthropic. They have the possibility of saving hundreds of thousands of lives every year. To me, that's a miracle. They have a possibility of reducing the chances of people developing a heart attack, or reducing the number of people who die from a heart attack, from a stroke, from cancer, from kidney failure, 30 to 40%, according to the CDC. That to me is a miracle. So there's opportunity to save massive numbers of human lives. I think it might be the biggest miracle, maybe since the invention of antibiotics, at affecting human existence. So that's why I think of it and start the book with the story about heart transplantation, which at the time seemed impossible, but today has become relatively routine. And similarly, I think that the use of generative AI in medicine, which when I started the book seemed somewhat impossible to most clinicians, I think very soon will become standard practice, just like we carry a stethoscope or just like we use an iPhone.
And when you take us back to that time and that miracle, you talk about certainly the challenges that the procedure brought, even though it was a miracle at the time, right? There are early patients, as you know, did not survive very long. Now it's fairly routine to do a heart transplant, a lung transplant. I know this very well. This is my discipline. So do you think our utility of use of AI will go through those same growing pains?
I think it will go through the same growing pains. Obviously, it won't be early death in the same way that it is in a patient who starts with a life-threatening illness for which there's only a short time for which they can survive. So the analogy is not perfect, but it's very similar. There are things that we need to overcome to perfect the technique. What we know is that generative AI tools have a tendency to hallucinate. In my writing the book, ChatGPT MD, I co-authored it with ChatGPT. I did that for a couple of reasons. One is I wanted to do it relatively rapidly, because if I waited 2 years, the standard publishing process, this technology is going to double in power every year. It means that by 5 years, by the way, it'll be 30 times more powerful. It means your car will go as fast, the equivalent of your car going as fast as an airplane. But if I waited even 2 years, everything I wrote would be out of date. So I co-authored with ChatGPT. I also wanted to see what the experience would be like if I was going to be recommending this tool for clinical practice. So the opportunity exists with the generative AI application to be able to make these changes, but we had to eliminate, as I said, hallucinations. And in writing the book, and so, by the way, it's a 30-page bibliography because I fact-checked everything that ChatGPT offered to me. I did find one major hallucination where it came up with exploration to the North Pole. That actually never happened. At least I couldn't find it anywhere in my extensive review of the literature. So we have to eliminate that. We have to address things like privacy, security, bias, misinformation. So it's not as though there aren't improvements that need to happen while the technology is moving forward, similar to the heart transplantation evolution that is there. But I think much of it is that when you go beyond human recognition of what is, I'll call it somewhat in quotes, normal, taking a heart from a human being and placing it into another and restarting it isn't normal. It's miraculous, but it's not routine. And so in that way, that was a learning curve. And as you well know from the history of cardiovascular surgery, and by the way, when I first went to Stanford for my residency, I actually went there as a heart surgeon to work with Dr. Norman Shumway, who was the first surgeon to do a heart transplant in the United States. I ended up focusing on children with cleft lip and cleft palate. That's a long story, but I know a lot about heart surgery, and the program where you trained is one of the best in the world. So congratulations on doing your education and experience there. But there is a learning process that's going to happen, and it's going to feel a little uncomfortable at first. It's going to feel uncomfortable asking these questions to the technology, although I think that is going to be diminished by the release last week by OpenAI of what they call GPT-4o, which is the ability to talk directly with the application, just like you have a friend there, just like you have a colleague there. Ask questions, get answers. That ability, I think, will make it feel far less foreign. But one of the hard parts of this, and I want to stress this a lot, it's not just technology, it's technology and people. The idea to clinicians of empowering patients, of trusting them to be able to do their own management. And yet that's exactly what we need. I said earlier about 100,000 lives saved. The reason is that we have 400,000 people a year dying from misdiagnoses in the United States, another 250,000 from medical errors, preventable medical errors, which I write about in my first book. My father actually died from one of those. And what we know is that we do a poor job of managing chronic disease. This is chronic diseases, hypertension, the number one cause of stroke. We only manage 55 to 60% of the time. Diabetes, a third of Americans either have or will have diabetes. It's a leading cause of kidney failure, major contributor to heart disease, accounts for 80 or 90% of peripheral amputations. We manage that effectively 30% of the time. And so this opportunity to recognize that the system of medicine that we have today, dependent upon patients coming to the doctor's office every 3 to 4 months for care of these types of disease, doesn't work. We need people to be able to be active managers of their disease. And that's going to require that we give them the tools. I mean, you well know we have in existence today. Many of my colleagues at Stanford University, as you say, where I teach in the medical and business school, many of my colleagues have invented wearable monitors. They're very accurate, 99.9%. They can measure blood pressure, pulse, blood oxygen, blood glucose, cardiovascular rhythms. And what do we do with them today in medicine? Nothing. They're not used. We have a massive source of expertise and information. And why don't we use them? Imagine a device that could measure blood pressure multiple times every single day. And after 100 readings, 80 are normal, 13 are abnormal, and 7 are borderline. Does the patient assume they're doing great? 80 of them are normal. They assume they're doing terribly. 13 are abnormal. What is going on? The patient doesn't have that ability to do it. As a clinician, you don't want the patient walking in with 100 blood pressure readings, and you don't want it sent into the electronic health record. So we're missing a massive opportunity. Imagine a generative AI tool capable of analyzing that data on a continuous basis, that is able to be programmed using plugins by the clinician, who doesn't require any sophisticated IT ability, just needs to set the medical clinical parameters that are expected. You order a blood pressure medication, and after a month, you'd expect it to be normal. And you can set the parameters of what normal looks like. And now the patient knows. And if in 1 month it's not doing well, the clinician, using a text message or telemedicine, can make a change rather than waiting to the 4-month mark. And by the way, at 4 months, if the patient is doing well, why see the patient? They're following exactly what you expected. This is an empowerment to patient. It's the ability to provide expertise. And I don't know how comfortable it's going to be for clinicians, just in the same way that many people were uncomfortable at the time of the first heart transplant.
Yeah. Well, we talked in the beginning about how reading a book warmed my heart, literally and figuratively. So I know your journey about the heart surgery as an interest, and then you went into a different discipline in surgery. I had and did have the honor of being trained by Sarah Shumway at University of Minnesota, Dr. Norman Shumway's daughter. So I used to call Dr. Shumway the professor, and she is an incredible mentor and colleague, and it was just wonderful to have the opportunity to learn from her, and to actually get the pearls and wisdom of her father sort of being passed on to me, because obviously he was a big influence in her life. It's incredible that we're having this great conversation about how excited we are about surgery, but even more excited, and I share your enthusiasm about AI. But many of our colleagues are not there, and I dare I say, many are not only skeptical, but they're quite frankly averse to even entertaining using this technology, even entertaining it being a consideration in the dome and realm of healthcare, and especially when it comes to the application of patient care. And you've given several examples of how you can absolutely apply the technology, apply the tool, empower patients to do a better job of taking care of themselves and managing their health, and also informing their path in total health, beyond just taking care of chronic disease. You can do so much more. You're just touching the surface. So one of the common misconceptions about AI that you could perhaps maybe allay for some of the folks that are listening that are skeptics, that are, not quite sold on this, and quite frankly think it's not something that we should even be entertaining as a possibility in terms of introducing into the healthcare space.
Well, the first part is the word AI. And we use that as though there's only one AI. And there are multiple different types of AI. So that's the first misconception. And they're very different. You have rules-based AI, where a clinician puts in a set of parameters. They're called heuristics, shorthand tools. The pathologist looks at a slide and sees a lot of mitoses, sees very abnormal nuclei, sees a particular cell type invading other types. We call it cancer. We have 4, 5, 6, 7 different rules that we follow, because that's the most the human brain can do. The problem with a rules-based approach is it can never be as good as the people developed it, because although we use only those heuristics, intuition is important when you're dealing with a limited number of ways to evaluate and reach a conclusion. That was followed, by the way, historically by what's called narrow AI. Starting around the year 2000, we had people actually using a biological principle, neural nets, deep learning, to be able to now take 2 sets of data, 10,000 mammograms, 5,000 of which are cancer, 5,000 of which are normal, and then to be able to find subtle differences. We're talking 30, 40, 50 different ways they differ, assign a probability factor to each. This is part of the way that EKGs in your discipline right now can be read actually better than most humans. And what we see is this technology works exceedingly well. The challenge is It's all dependent upon the data set that you give it. And if you give it a data set which is visual, it's actually quite direct to be able to resolve it. And the results are excellent. The challenge is it's narrow. You can't use a tool for mammograms on chest x-rays or brain scans. You can't use one for EKGs of the heart to be able to do studies of the brain. So it's right now, there's 600 of those. We probably need 10,000. They're very expensive and difficult to build. And they often reflect the practice of humans. And that is where we see some major problems. We see tremendous bias. What we know is that in American medicine today, Black patients don't receive the same care as white patients. We know that during COVID, they received COVID tests when they were in short supply, half as often as white patients with the same symptoms, even though the mortality rate was double. That's just the way practice is, and this technology duplicates it because that's the data sets from which it comes. So there is a lot of skepticism about that. And just as an aside, we've never been able to translate that into the totality of medicine, because to do that, you need to have the electronic health record. As we know, that is not a very good source of 100% reliable data. And in a narrow AI tool, if it's only 5 or 10% off, the results you get are not particularly usable and very frequently exceedingly wrong. So that's where we get to generative AI, and why I think this is different than all the AI in the past. And that's what people have to understand. And by the way, the willingness of clinicians to embrace it has gone up in 1 year from 15% to 40%. 40% of doctors today say they are going to use it next year. So I think we're actually talking about waiting a couple of years and letting people have more experience with it. And I think some of that's going to go away. But within all of that, what they need to recognize is how this tool works, which is that it's trained on the totality of information, all the textbooks, all the journal articles. That's the way we train medical students. And then there are parameters. We explain which is more important than something else. An article written more recently is better than one in the past. One from a peer-reviewed journal is better than one from a non-peer-reviewed. One from a major academic institution is better than one from an individual clinician just writing about a particular problem without the data sets to back it up. And the result of all of that is an incredible amount of accuracy at being able to answer any question posed by a clinician and any question posed by a patient. In the clinician realm, I talk in the book about a surgeon that I know who was in the operating room. She did a very, very complex neck operation. At the end of the procedure, the anesthesiologist said that the vocal cords were adducted. They were touching each other. And if you removed the tube, the airway would be obstructed and have to be re-intubated, did a tracheostomy, or at least admitted into the ICU without extubating the patient. She pulled out her phone, went to ChatGPT, looked up all the cases available in the world, and immediately knew that there were several in which this kind of thing had happened. She knew she hadn't damaged any nerves to the larynx, but the anesthetic that is used to do the procedure, in some patients, for whatever reason, diffuses farther away from the operative site. And in every case report, within 30 minutes, the anesthetic wore off and the patient was fine. And that's what she did. And the care improved. But I think more importantly is the ways that this can now be used by patients. One way it can be used is that before a patient comes to see you as a clinician, they can learn about their problem, not the way they do today in Google, clicking on a link and coming in with 100 pages of printout, half of which is garbage. No, this is actually getting educated. And I talk in the book about the Khan Academy, which in education has flipped it around. Rather than going to class as you and I did and learning as going home or doing homework, instead, you go to your computer the night before, you learn the subject at home at your own pace, and in class you can delve deeper. Similarly, when the patient comes to your office, they know a lot more about it. They know a lot more about the tests that you're going to order. They know a lot more about the diagnosis they likely have. They know a lot more about the treatment options, and you can go into a far greater detail around it. I had a podcast last week where I was talking to the interviewer. At the end of the podcast, once the recording was off, she said, "Dr. Pearl, you're a skier, and you are a physician. And my husband, about 2 months ago, fell skiing with his arm over his head, slid down about 100 feet. And the shoulder still hurts. So he can't use it as well as the opposite side, particularly when he tries raising his arms to reach for something on a shelf. What do you think's going on? And I said, I think I know exactly what's going on, but why don't you put the information in ChatGPT? She had never used it before. 5 days later, she texted me and said, thank you so much. It said he most likely had a rotator cuff, which was the diagnosis. It said he needed an MRI and explained what the test would be like. And then it said that the treatment was probably going to be surgery, and I should immediately see a orthopedic surgeon, which I did, who did the procedure and said that if I'd waited a few more months, he might not have been able to reattach the tendon because the muscle would have contracted. That is what we are talking about. And look at that as a clinician and say, oh my gosh, I can't trust patients with all that information. Patients, people today, they manage their bank accounts, they manage their finance using technology. They're able to order all the retail they need. Stop thinking of the limitations of the patient and recognize that the problem has been we haven't given them the right tool. So the tool they've had to use, which is a search engine, is just not capable of giving them the expertise they need. And now we have that tool. It is miraculous. And if they use it well, and we can save hundreds of thousands of lives every year, it's going to be a massive success that we will look back and laugh at ourselves, I think, for our reticence to employ it.
That's a very good segue into the second question I wanted to ask. So you've addressed how to maybe address or combat perhaps the skepticism of the physicians, perhaps having them look at this tool as a different kind of AI than what existed before. And I think you're absolutely true about this AI and why you wrote the book in such a rapid fashion. Is the AI we're using right now is the worst AI we'll ever use, right? It's going to get better tomorrow, the next day, a month from now, a year from now, and we'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, that was a terrible version of ChatGPT that we were using in 2024, but it's much better now. What about the patients? Because there's certainly patients out there, and you've seen some of these surveys where they'll say, patients, are you going to go to a doctor that uses AI, or would you prefer to go to a doctor that doesn't use AI? And many patients are like, well, I don't want my doctor using AI. I don't trust AI. I want the doctor to just, use his or hers lexicon of knowledge to treat me. So how do you maybe address and maybe inform some of the patients out there, besides the example you just provided for that young lady, about how they can maybe overcome some of their skepticism with using AI beyond just using it? Because that's what I tell patients to do. I tell people all the time, it's surprising to me when people talk about AI and they have all of these myths and theories about it, but they've never used it. They've never actually used the tool. And when I ask them to just, get an account, many of them are free and you can use it and just experiment with it, they're fascinated with it because it's way better than, as you mentioned, a search engine. But what would you tell the patients? Let's say there are patients listening now and they're a little skeptical. They don't trust the doctor that's using AI. What would you say to them?
I think you're describing the need for a broad educational process. The first step is exactly what you said, and I want to applaud you for it. Use it, try it, put some information in place. If you're going to see the doctor, just put it in place before you go and just see what happens. See how closely what the clinician tells you aligns with what the tool says. See how much more knowledge you'll have so you can ask the right questions. If you have a particular problem at home, just put the information in place. The more times you do it, the more times you use it. It's like any other technology. It takes about 10 hours of experience to learn how to put what's called prompts, the right questions in place, and then to be able to ask it again and again and to ask it to modify. And as the memory is growing in these generative AI tools, then the ability to have a longer conversation in greater detail is increasing. So that's the first thing that I would say. You have to try to do it. The second thing about it is we know from the evolution of acceptance of new technology that there's always this process that happens. At first, only the real fanatics want to use it. You have the next cohort of individuals, and at some point when your friends are starting to use it, you're going to start to use it. When they tell you how good it is, you're going to start to be able to use it. This is the natural transition, the curves that we follow with all technology. So again, I'm less worried from that standpoint. But I think for the final piece that's there, and this is really a difficult topic to raise, patients have to understand the fallibility of American medicine today. Not because the doctors are not smart, not because they don't work hard and be dedicated, but the time constraints that exist make physicians often cut corners. And we, as I said earlier, there's 400,000 people who die every year from misdiagnoses, and another 400,000 who have permanent disability as a consequence. As you well know, in the New England Journal of Medicine, I think it was out 2 months ago, published an article that 1 in 4 patients who dies in a hospital or is transferred to the ICU has a misdiagnosis. These are very skilled clinicians. So we have to understand the fallibility. 250,000 people die from a medical error. And then recognize that this is an opportunity to improve that, particularly, as I say, people who have chronic disease. We know 60% of Americans have one or more. And amongst people in Medicare, it's over 70% of people have 2 or more chronic diseases. These are the types of things that lead to life-threatening, life-ending events: heart attacks, strokes, kidneys failure, cancer. These are the problems that exist. And we start to see the fallibility. You start to say, wow, I actually would prefer a clinician who's going to use this. And for anyone who wants to have one additional piece of data, medical knowledge is doubling every 72 days. Do you really believe that every clinician can stay up to date with a doubling of information that rapidly? I don't think so. And so this tool to augment the clinician, this is not a tool to replace doctors. It's never going to replace the nurses in the hospitals doing bedside medicine, but it fills in the gaps. When you're a patient and you have a question, it gives you information. When a clinician would normally go to the library and research a topic for several hours, that information, that an individual can use the tool to get the information he or she needs. It's going to be a second opinion to help and look over the shoulder. When it comes to areas of bias, an area that I write about extensively in my second book on caring, how the culture of medicine kills doctors and patients, it can notify clinicians when they are skipping steps for particular patients that don't seem to be medically driven and might reflect bias. I think this ability to take what otherwise might be subconscious, the ability to provide the time that clinicians need by being able to provide information quickly. These are the types of ways I think that healthcare can be improved. The triad of a dedicated clinician, an empowered patient, and generative AI, I have no doubt will be more powerful than any of the 3 alone. And as I say near the end of my book, I predict the time will come when patients will stop worrying when the clinician uses generative AI tool and will start worrying when the clinician does not. Let me add one piece if I could, though, which is that today what exists, GPT 4.0, which is the most recent release, is not yet ready to do many of the things that I talk about. It's really good to be able to, I'll say, experiment and play with it. But you should not be making medical decisions based upon it. You still need to have a human overseeing it. But what I said earlier, doubling every year means that 5 years from now, it's 30 times more powerful. Anyone who has looked at the information, seen how this technology as an example, can take the exam that you and I took for getting our medical license, the Step 2 examination, and will outscore 90% of clinicians on it today. It was in the middle of the pack among clinicians when it was first released. It's a doubling in ability. 5 years from now, it's going to score every time at the very, very top. When they gave very complex patient questions to the physicians in Boston at a esteemed hospital, this tool was better than they were already, or better than the average. It's hard to imagine 5 years from now it will not be as good as the best. They did a study with ED physicians, where they had ED physicians, and they gave them information on a patient showing up in an ER, again, complex patients, and also gave it to the generative AI tool. The clinicians were accurate 82% of the time, the generative AI tool 92% of the time. We have a lot of data that says it's now getting to be very good almost as good as the best doctors. 5 years from now, it will be as good or better than the best in our field. We have to figure out how to welcome it into our practices and help our patients welcome it into their home.
That is definitely the purpose of the Smarter Healthcare with AI podcast, to educate about how we can achieve smarter AI-augmented healthcare using powerful tools like ChatGPT to enhance the work of doctors and nurses caring for patients every day. Okay, Dr. Pearl, we've reached the halfway point of our conversation and need to stop here. Coming up next time, Dr. Robert Pearl, the author of ChatGPT MD, will discuss why time is of the essence when it comes to the merging of AI and healthcare.
We are at a unique point in history, the dawn of another era. And if we don't embrace the opportunity now, I'm fearful that we won't have a chance again by the time the corporate entities have taken control and made that the way that medicine is provided in the United States and demanded it of us as the providers of care.
This has been Smarter Healthcare with AI. If you'd like to find out how to bridge the gap between medical experts and tech innovators and discover how AI can make us healthier and more human, go to Tetteh.com. Smarter Healthcare with AI with Dr. Hassan Tetteh is a production of Forbes Books.